All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode for our podcast, The Healing Place. I thank you for joining us. We have a very special guest on today. I'm excited for you guys to hear her story and for us to learn together. And so, Amanda, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our guest on to our guest. Listen to me. I need to slow down, right? I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our audience, and I want you to tell them who you are and what you're about, and we're going to get into your story.
Okay, well, my name is Amanda Quick. I am a mom, a wife, an energy healer, and a soon-to-be published author, as well as a speaker. And I'm here really to share my story that's going to be out in my new book that's releasing in January.
Good. Tell us the name of your book.
Yeah, the name of my book is The Sex Trafficker's Wife, and it's a memoir of my life from 2016 to 2020. Mm-hmm. So obviously, it's a big story. That's the name of my book.
Yeah. When I was reading your bio and I read the title of your book, I was like, oh gosh, I want to know all about this. So Yep. So we'll get into it. So in 2016, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had 3 kids. My youngest was 1, still nursing. My whole world was my kids. I was this very typical housewife, and my husband worked long hours, but for the most part, I was grateful that he worked so that I could stay home. And he traveled for work, and he was, we weren't quite as connected as I wanted, but we had 3 young kids and he worked a lot. So it felt like normal. And then one day he doesn't come home, and I don't know where he is. He's always late, but this was like really late. And at 2:00 in the morning, he wasn't in the hospitals. 5:00 in the morning, they transferred me to the jail to say, maybe he's there, call us back if he's not, and we'll help you. It was the most shock of my life to hear that my husband had been arrested for attempted human trafficking and had a $250,000 bond. And I'm like, what? 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 And I thought it was some kind of mistake. Like he was dead in a ditch and somebody stole his wallet kind of mistake. Like that's the level of disbelief I had. There was no, oh, well, that explains things. Absolutely not. I had zero idea. I believed my husband was a good man, was a safe man. We were comfortable. We were, we weren't strapped for money. I mean, I even had the money to bail him out, which most people don't have that kind of resources. And, I was like, what is going on? And because of all of my beliefs that I had about my husband being safe, by really even my own identity, I really thought there had to be some other explanation. There had to be some other explanation, and I was going to have to just sit tight and figure it out. And so, I hired lawyers, and I was like, I'm going to help him, because if anybody you knew was in a situation, you didn't believe they were a bad person, you would help. And then at a bond hearing that we learned that had been a sting operation. So it was a sting operation that the federal government and in joint forces with the city had arranged to basically lure people interested in having sex with children. And so it was a sting operation that offered an 11 and 14-year-olds, and those who showed up in any capacity were arrested, essentially. So he was not the only defendant in this situation. And, there was probably 4 or 5 there that day in the bond hearing, but still didn't make any sense, right? Like, how did he get wrapped up in this? And so once I bailed him out, I was able to have a conversation with him about it. And what he admitted to was escorts. He admitted to adult escorts. He admitted that was something he'd been doing for forever. And he was very flippant about it, just no big deal. Obviously, that wasn't exactly my reaction, but he was also basically saying that when they offered children, he didn't think it was real. He thought they were just trying to, basically steal money from people and rip them off. But if there was any chance that it was possibly real, he needed to figure that out so he could report them. And that's how he got mixed up into this. And I tell people that and they look at me like, well, that's a bullshit. And, at the same time, as, the person that I believed I was and the person I believed I was married to, I was looking for any possible thing to hold on to that would make my world make sense. And so it didn't make sense to me that he would be interested in children. It didn't make sense to me in any way, shape, or form. Like I was barely able to even grasp this idea that he had been seeing escorts for like forever, let alone anything beyond that. And so I chose to believe him. I chose to believe him in large because I felt like I didn't have any other option. And I was also very terrified, truly, of being alone with 3 kids. And I grew up without my father, and it set a whole huge trajectory in my life. And I was very, very scared that my kids were that somehow my kids were gonna grow up without a father too. And so to keep the family together, to figure out how to get through this, because at some level I still believe he's innocent for what they're charging him for, but I have no choice but to stay and to support him, because he's not going to be okay if I take off. And if he's not okay, the kids will lose their dad, and then things will just get even worse. Like that's the story I'm running with. You know, and I think as women, we do this a lot, where we have to stay in these uncomfortable situations for the kids to make sure that everybody is okay enough, never mind what we're going through.
And I want to stop you right there, because I think what you're saying is really good. And a lot of women need to understand that, you know, what you just explained is exactly why a lot of other women stay, because of and how long were you guys together?
We were married 6 years, together 8 or 9, 3 kids, you know, all the things.
Right. And so you had a level of comfortability in your life.
Yes.
And so having to kind of uproot, I'm guessing, because were you a stay-at-home mom?
Yes, exactly. I hadn't worked in 6 years. My whole life was the kids in the house.
Right. And so that's scary, because it's like, how am I going to continue to support them? How am I going to continue to live this kind of life that we're living? What does that look like? And if he's if he's the support, he's the provider, he's the head of the house, and from what you know, nothing was ever wrong. So what do you really believe? Now,
Exactly.
do you have a question about the money that he was bringing in?
Well, so he brought in a decent amount of money, but he worked in IT security. He made over 6 figures, and we always had more than we needed. And so I didn't even actually notice that he'd been paying for other things, because he had a different bank account, and money just it wasn't like he took money out of our shared stuff. I never saw it. And we always had more than enough. I didn't know the exact dollar that his job paid him. And, you know, we didn't budget like that. And so, you know, I was absolutely scared. I couldn't afford the same lifestyle that we had been living on my own. I hadn't been working even in so long, you know, and being alone with 3 kids by myself with no support, like all of those thoughts are in my head. I'm also terrified that I'm going to somehow get caught up in this whole situation. You know, I thought for a little while that they might come raid the house and all of that, and it never happened. But those are the thoughts going through my head and how scared I was. And the thing that happens when big stuff like this goes on is you actually isolate completely from the rest of the world, because there was articles in the paper out. There were people wanting to know all of this information, and I couldn't tell them anything of what was going on. But it meant I stayed further isolated. There was nobody for me to talk to about what was going on, because if I did, they either wanted to know details of the case that I couldn't tell them, or they had judgment of me. And not that I wasn't judging myself in some way, but they had so much, you know, you don't have to stay, you can do this or that. And they didn't get it. And so I didn't talk to them. The only safe person to talk to was my husband. And the only person, you know, it's kind of like what happens with kidnap victims. And the only safe person in their world is the one who caused the trauma. And that's really what it felt like. The only person I could talk to about what was going on was the person who caused the problem. And so he was in my head all the time. And everything that I was going through had to go through him also. And so it was this like continual thing over and over again, that he caused this problem, but we were in it together. And the only way to stay safe was to stay together.
And it's more normal than what people are thinking. Unless you are in it, you will never understand it. And it's hard to explain, because people on the outside always have a solution to something they've never experienced. And
Correct.
so, you know, when I get clients that come in with similar backgrounds as yours, you know, the first thing they do is kind of break down, because they feel so guilty and shame. And it's like, no, you have no reason to feel guilty. You have no reason to feel shame, because when you're in a situation and all you know is what you know, then what else are you left to do?
Exactly.
to get through it the way that you know how to get through it. And so, other people. So let me ask you a question, because when we think about the judgments and the questions people would ask, because the case is sex trafficking. And so you have
Exactly.
3 small children. Did the thought ever come across your mind, as a mom, did he touch any of my children?
Well, so at first, now I have 3 boys.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I believed they were safe regardless because they were boys.
Mm-hmm.
And actually people even said that to me, like, oh, you should be grateful you have boys because they're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wouldn't really let my mind go there for the most part. I wouldn't really let that cross my mind. But at some point I was like, it's, if it even sort of went there, then at least I know they're boys. Later, I learned he was interested in both men and women. There were escorts of both men and women. And so that blew that one up. But then I still am trying to hold on to this idea that he's only ever been with adults. He told me that I was the youngest person he had ever been with because we started dating when I was 18. And so it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to still proceed because he's not showing me otherwise. It's just this thing that happened. And so we get through the criminal trial, and there never ended up being an actual trial. They offered a plea deal, and he took the plea deal because the plea deal was 4 years of probation, and that was it. They never raided the house. They never interviewed us. They never looked at anything further. They took his devices, but they never went through them. They simply offered probation only. And so he obviously took it. I was actually upset by it. I was like, aren't you going to fight this? I thought you were innocent. But it was, in a lot of ways, his lawyers told him there's too much evidence. Otherwise, if you fight this, you will go to jail. That didn't obviously make me feel any better. But from his standpoint, taking probation made sense. He still was going to be on the registry. He was still going to go through treatment programs, but he would never go to jail. And so January 2017, he pled guilty. And there was an update in the Colorado statute at the same time that changed the constitutional right to parent. So previously, sex offenders weren't allowed to be around their own children. That changed with this new updated statute, and sex offenders are not automatically removed from their constitutional right to parent anymore unless it can be proven that their own children are explicitly in danger. There's a belief that your own kids are treated differently than kids that are not yours. And so he actually was able to move back home. At the time, I was grateful. I was no longer going to be by myself anymore. I was going to have help. It was an opportunity to come back together and heal as a family, because I still just believe he'd only been with adult escorts. And okay, now that the case is over, we can refocus on getting healing and working this out. And he tried to even get a job again, but his mental health was really, really struggling after all of this, and he couldn't focus on anything. And I soon realized that I needed to go back to work. I had been out of work 6 years. My kids were getting, my youngest had just turned 2 at that time. And so wasn't my ideal, but somebody needed to go back to work at some point. And I wasn't going to make the kind of money he made, but I needed to start, because it was just going to get harder. So I went back to work, and I found myself, so I had been surrounded with this bubble of belief that everything was safe. I was safe if my family was safe. We were together, but all of a sudden going back to work changed it, because I had to leave the bubble to go back to work, and I had to talk to other people. And I really didn't want anybody to know what was going on in my personal life, even though there had been articles in the paper out. I didn't know if everybody would remember or put those dots together. And so I was very, very careful about never mentioning his name, never talking about anything. And it was like I now had 2 bubbles. I had the family bubble and I had the work bubble, and they weren't allowed to talk. They weren't allowed. I literally wouldn't even say my husband's name to my coworkers. I wouldn't talk about my life. And, that worked for a little while, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting to basically live these 2 separate lives. And, things like the company Christmas party sent me into a full on, oh my God, what am I going to do? People are going to expect my husband to come, but I don't think he can, nor do I want him to. And I was having a harder and harder time with it. And any version of intimacy was getting very difficult with my husband, because as I was starting to process that he had been with, escorts, it was all of a sudden like there were ghosts in the room with us. And I couldn't hardly look at him anymore. And I would come home from work and I would need half a bottle of wine to even talk to him, to even look at him. And it was clearly not healthy. And I was seeing myself go down this downward spiral just to try to figure out how to keep my family together, because I had taken all of the burden of keeping the family together on me. This was my responsibility, my job. And it wasn't working anymore. And he would just wanted to reconnect. And, you know, he would act like things were amazing and he was doing so much better. And, you know, he really tried to play out the exact person that I always wanted him to be, an exact relationship I always wanted to have. And, you know, I wasn't even allowed to be upset because he was a different person. And like, if I ever was upset, then he would make me feel guilty in a lot of ways because he was working on it and he was different now. And, you know, just like anything else, I wasn't even allowed to have the feelings I had. So I shoved him back down, right? I shoved him back down and I turned to alcohol and continued on my merry way until I couldn't anymore. And I started to see that that wasn't working. And I realized I needed to leave the marriage. I actually decided I was going to date a coworker because I had found myself attracted to a coworker just for I needed something else. And of course, I'm taking all of this. I'm doing this. I'm breaking the family up. I have all of this. How, you know, why am I messing my life up even more? And I go down that rabbit hole, except I tell everybody. I'm not doing it in secret. I'm just totally honest with, which is hard to do. But I said, I know what it's like to be cheated on. I'm not doing that. And, you know, we stayed living together and I was dating because for the kid's sake, he really wanted to, you know, I think on some level he was terrified to move out and what that would look like. So he wanted to stay in the house. And, you know, things were kind of messy, truthfully. I'm dating, living with my husband while my kids are there, super messy. But I learned how to have fun again. I started to have fun, and all of a sudden I was more than a mom and a wife. I was going on road trips. I was going to music festivals. I was, you know, with somebody who didn't bring ghosts into the room. And it really shifted things for me in a way that felt like, oh, I don't have to just be burdened by everything that he did. Like I'm more than that. And it was really healthy in that regard and also really messy at home. And eventually I got promoted at my job. And so I was now going to be his boss. So I had to break up with him, which was good on some level because I needed to figure out my family life. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with myself. And my husband took that as a means to, we're going to get back together. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. And he was very upset by it. He was very pushy. He would, you know, try to hug me and touch me without consent. He would send me explicit love notes. He was really trying to do everything possible to try to keep me in the relationship. And eventually when it stopped working, or really never worked, but he decided he was going to file for divorce because, you know, those things weren't working. So he was going to try this other thing. And maybe that would, I believe now he was trying to scare me to stay. And he filed for divorce and he filed to kick me out of the house. He said that he was the primary parent and I needed to move out. And I was like, excuse me, you're a sex offender on probation. You can't even really go to the kids' schools or their activities and you want to kick me out of the house? What? So he tries to play hardball and we end up going to temporary orders hearings. And I, you know, tried to basically say he shouldn't have any overnights with them, you know, and he can see them on after school or on weekends, but, you know, I didn't want to take their dad away necessarily, but I really didn't know what was going on with him. I didn't really know what was there. And I was starting to have a little bit of feelings like there was more under the surface, but I didn't know what it was. The judge, however, in the state of Colorado, it's a very, very 50 state. And unless I could prove that my kids were in direct danger, she couldn't take overnights away. She couldn't give him less time. And his probation and treatment provider said that he was low risk. So we ended up having like a 50-50 split for a period of time where the kids were going back 4 times a week or some insanity. And through that, things got worse. The kids' behavior started to get directed at me in a very negative way. I was the one who left. Daddy told us you won't forgive him, and that's why we can't be together. And it's called parental alienation, when one parent basically turns the kids against the other. And that's exactly what he was doing. And it was all my fault. And he was telling them that. And he was talking about how lonely he was and how much he missed them. And, you know, doing all of the Disneyland dad video games and candy. And then when they come to my house, it's boundaries and bedtimes. And so things were just escalating. And it was like I was fighting with my kids and my soon-to-be ex-husband. And it was just getting harder and harder. It got to the point where they actually got violent with me to come over to my house.
Your children?
My children were violent with me, and I don't want to be here, and I only want to be at daddy's. And so, you know, these are now, they're now 3 and, you know, 6 and 8, you know, and, you know, the kids that I stayed home with and nursed and, you know, grew from my body are physically fighting with me. So very challenging. And I knew exactly who was to blame, but it was also, you know, we're playing this all out in court now. And I had hired lawyers and parental rights evaluators, and we had psychological evaluations done. And it was obvious to me that there was a lot more going on from him, but, you know, and he was diagnosed with some personality disorders, but at the same time, it wasn't enough to take away any custody. And so the recommendation to the court was still somewhat 50-50, which was frustrating.
I mean, it's gotta be, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm like, this is out of this world. This is like, almost like a Lifetime movie. I'm like, ooh.
It's worse than a Lifetime movie because I'm not done yet.
I'm sitting here like, I don't know. What in the world?
I know.
Like, wait a minute. You're telling me that this man who, big case, it's been in the papers, it's been in the news,
yes,
and you're telling me I have to share custody.
Correct.
And plus, he's got the nerve to try to turn my babies, because they're still little.
I know.
Me, and they want to. Go
Yes.
ahead, because the thoughts is going through my mind. I'm like, oh God.
Yes. And this was like, that's exactly what was happening. And people were shocked. Wait, he was arrested for trying to have sex with an 11 and 14-year-old. And you what? You have to go through all of this? And that's the reality of the court system. Because I stayed and supported him, I deemed him safe. And therefore, this happens every time somebody stays in a relationship with an unsafe person. When they wake up and they realize things are not okay, they now have to fight against it. And the court essentially re-traumatizes them because they have to prove new things. And and this happens over and over and over again. But in this case, I had to basically prove to the court my kids were directly unsafe by their father and beyond just parental alienation. I had to prove more. So here we go. So as things are getting worse and things are getting volatile, we had one recommendation from an evaluator come that said basically it has to be 50-50. And she followed all of the statutes, and she was kind of like, it's getting to be high conflict, but you know, this was her recommendation based on all of the state of Colorado rules. And we sent a settlement over because I was like, I don't know what else to do. That's clearly, we have to try. And he ignored it. He ignored our settlement offer. And then the month that he ignored it, at the time he was 6, almost 7, starts coming on to me sexually. Like he's sitting down at watching a movie, and he's like getting in my lap, and I'm like, what is going on? This is like, I could feel the energy behind what was going on. And I started to get this feeling like he had been starting to groom them, especially my middle child, because my middle child was much more sensitive, much more effeminate, much more empathetic in a lot of ways. And, you know, the kid that feels all the emotions, that's him. And I went, oh, okay, obviously there's more going on here. And how do I prove it? Because the court doesn't care what he did 4 years ago at this point. And so you have to be very careful when you can't make new allegations in a divorce, or you look like the alienating parent. So I had to proceed carefully. And I knew that, but we pulled the settlement. We basically said, nope, we're going to court. There's more going on here. We got to figure this out. We got the evaluator back involved. And then as soon as we did that, the bottom dropped out in a way that I did not expect. I was driving my kids to school, and my middle child, who was in the back of the car, I was like, my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about work and all the things I was going to do that day. He says to me, sometimes I suck on daddy's fingers. Yeah. And I can feel all of the things that you're feeling. And in that moment, you can't say anything. You can't shock him. You can't freak them out, because he doesn't know it's bad. He doesn't know it's wrong. I don't need to, you know, I also have to be very careful what ends up back with his father and what happens. And so I just had to send him off to school. And I spoke to his therapist, I spoke to my lawyers. His therapist suggested I ask him to show me what that looked like. And When I did, it's as bad as you think. And I then called Child Protective Services. So with his therapist saying that she would have to report it, it was enough for my lawyers to say, you have to report it. So I did. Child Protective Services interviewed him and scared him so bad that he was hiding under the table, unable to really speak to the investigator. He clearly did not know how to speak to children, because he just was like, oh, do you still play that game with your dad? And my kid's like hiding under the table, scared of this man. And he was like, no, not anymore. And then they left and dropped it, because probation decided to just polygraph him and ask, questions unrelated to what I actually suggested happened. They basically said, were you touching him or anything like that? And because he passed the polygraph, probation cleared him and CPS dropped it. Yes, I know. And I'm sitting here going, what the hell am I going to do? Because clearly there's more going on here. Whether he knows it's inappropriate or not, it doesn't matter, because he's clearly grooming my kids. Whether he knows, I wasn't even sure if his mental health was capable of recognizing how inappropriate he was being. But regardless, my kids are not okay. They're not safe, and I'm still having to send them over to them 4 times a freaking week. And as mama bear, you just want to pick up your kids and pack up and peace out. But I can't do that.
Oh gosh. I would have been sent in jail. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
My heart is just aching, because again, when you think about the system and you think about all these harbors, and it's like, when is the system going to work the right way?
The truth is, the system is not protective in any way, shape, or form. The system is only punitive. Something has to happen that's big enough for the system to do anything about it. And then they have to prove it. It's innocent until proven guilty, right? And so there is no, and this is something I had to learn. I had been giving away all of my power to the system. I had been saying, I don't know how to put this together. This is too complicated. I don't want to take my kid's dad away, and yet all these things are in play. You choose, we hired evaluators. I had lawyers, had other people making recommendations to me for how to put it together. There are statutes on each state of what custody needs to look like and how this gets arranged. And there's so much, we put up so much of our power in this safety into the system. But I had to learn that's not how we do it, because the system wasn't going to work in this situation. The system was, in fact, failing me. And it was very likely that I was going to end up sharing custody with my abuser and my children's abuser. And so I was, at this point, I felt like I'm doing everything I possibly can. I felt like I had hired all the people. I had called Child Protective Services. Nobody was listening. What am I going to do? And it was actually my mental health professional, my therapist, who says to me, have you ever seen a psychic? I was like, what? You're crazy, right? I'm at this point in time, I'm completely agnostic. I'm not atheist, but I don't really have an opinion one way or another. My mom was very spiritual, but I struggled with a lot of the organized religions, and I just sort of stayed away from a lot of it. And I was like, that's not even real. Like, you're crazy. That's where I was at. And she's like, well, I know a good one. And at this point, again, I'm desperate. I'm like, okay, sure, send it over. I will try anything, because clearly nobody else is helping me. So she sends me this lady's name, and I go see her, and it's all like crystals and deities and all the things. And I'm like, okay, it's not sure what I think of this, but I'm willing to go anywhere at this point. If somebody thinks they have an idea to help me, I will take it. And so whether you believe in any of these things or not, it doesn't matter, because this is how we proceed here. And it felt like I was just guided to go see this girl. So I did. And she tells me about a past life of mine that she was reading, where I was with him, and we had 2 of the 3 kids that we had today. And he was physically abusive in this life, and he had a lot of drugs and alcohol, and that I got in front of the kids a lot, and I was protecting the kids. And as she's telling me the story, it's like she's reading my mind of what I'd been through in the last 4 years, the reasons I stayed, I was surprised. So how did she know that's how I felt? You didn't think you could leave. You didn't think you could support yourself. So you didn't, and you had to stay for the kids and all of these reasons. And I'm like, what, how do you know that's what's been going on in my head? And I'm kind of freaked out, but I'm like, okay, I'm listening. You got me. And then she tells me, in that life, he beat you to death. and he threw me down the stairs and beat me to death. And my whole body starts feeling all of this fear. And I had this realization that I was terrified of him, but he'd never laid a hand on me. And he was mentally and emotionally manipulative and abusive, but he never laid a hand on me. And so she was basically saying, you have been holding on to so much fear, and it's been making you unable to move, unable to take action, unable to do the things because of all of that fear. And it's not even real, this life fear. And I was like, wow, okay, I see that, I feel it. And then she says, the reason you're sitting in this chair is because you have to choose. You have to choose once and for all to be done with this pattern. And I was like, I'm done, I choose. And she says, no, you have to really choose. And this, I think, is something that most people don't realize. There's some part of us that wishes things were different. I wanted him to get better. I wanted my family back. I wanted this to not be my reality. I had some part of me that held this idea that somewhere, somehow, things were going to be better in some alternative reality. He was going to get healed. The kids were going to get better. This world that I have now been in doesn't exist anymore. And so I've been holding on to this small possibility that things were going to be better one day. But what I was doing is I was giving energy to that possibility that meant our family would go back together, that he was potentially going to get healed. And I was allowing that to be any possibility instead of seeing the truth, instead of really recognizing the truth of who he was and the truth of the fact that I could not give that any energy. I had to completely put everything towards creating a safe and secure environment for myself and my kids. So I saw it and I said, okay, you're right. I'm done. I'm done. I'm completely done. And what is it going to take to actually make this happen? And so she was, looking at all of these things, and she said, you have more help available than you know. And you have to ask for help. You have to stop hiding all of this. You have to talk to everybody. Everybody knows somebody, and there are people out there who want to help you. And he has no desire to get better. He has no desire to look at his demons or anything of the sort. And so you can't hold on to any of that. You just have to focus on basically bringing light to everything that's been going on. And she says, the judge wants to even help you, but you have to give her the evidence so she can. And so I left that session a totally changed person, because I thought I had been doing everything. I thought I had hired all the right people and I was doing all the steps, but clearly I hadn't. And what happened over the next 6 weeks was truly miraculous. Honestly, I went back to work and I found that one of the girls I worked with had an uncle who worked for ICE, who put me in touch with Homeland Security, who got me in touch with the arresting officer and the local police department. They reopened the CPS report. It didn't actually go anywhere, but I all of a sudden had people in my corner going, we believe you and we want to help. I then got the district attorney to unseal the case file. And I all of a sudden had the actual case file of what happened in 2016. And I was able to read the transcript of the communication between him and the undercover agent. And if I had any doubt before that, it was gone, because I had been married to the man, and I had 3 kids with him, and I knew of his deviances, and I knew the little, people's preferences. And when they show up on the reports, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, he really wanted that. I was able to start listening to my kids in a different way. I started to see all of their behavior in a different light. They were reacting to so much in their environment. And I started recording them. I started asking the questions and recording it and getting more information. I found out, he had moved their bedrooms around, and my middle child was more isolated from the other 2, and he was climbing into bed with him at night, and I got that recorded. I started really reading the books about keeping bodies safe and private parts private, and really trying to do as much as I could to help them in the meantime. And every time something didn't quite work, we filed motions and tried to restrict time. When that failed the first time, I went, okay, it's okay. There's more evidence I need. There's something else I need still. And so we're going to keep going. And I really had to put a deeper level of trust in myself, that it wasn't about giving my power to system. The system was there to help me, but I had to guide it. I had to say what needed to happen. I had to focus on safety and security for myself and my kids. And how were you going to help me do that, instead of you tell me what to do? And so in February of 2020, we had our final divorce hearing, and that was only to negotiate custody at that point. And, we stood up in court, the evaluator stood up, given all of the evidence, we were able to prove through the expert witness that with his dependent personality disorders, with his history, it was very possible that he unwillingly or unknowingly or not, was grooming them. I was able to share all of my testimony. They admitted all of it to show my state of mind and where I was. The judge was appalled that he was sleeping with the children and ordered him on the spot to stop doing that. We were able to basically discount all of probation and his therapist's recommendation. He was low risk because it was merely their opinion and they hadn't been following their own rules for the most part. And it felt like the performance of my life in a lot of ways to stand up in court publicly and state how unsafe myself and my kids had been. And a few days after that, the day before my birthday, we got our final order, and all of his time was drastically reduced to like a couple of afternoons a week. And he was given about 10 different things he needed to achieve if he wanted to ever get any kind of visitation. And he did not a single one of them. And so 6 weeks after that, he was only allotted supervised visitation. And we have not heard from him since. So he dropped it. In April of 2020, on my oldest son's birthday, was the last time we have heard from him. He lost control of myself, and it wasn't really about the kids. So he peaced out.
Wow. So, because listening to your story, it's almost, I'm not going to say it's almost, he really had groomed you too.
Yes, correct. 100%.
Yeah. And so this man was able to create a false reality for you the whole time.
Yes.
He was like a whole devil in the street.
Correct. And when you live in that false reality, you don't even know you're in it. Yeah. Right. And it's gaslighting all the way, and it takes over everything. And then things don't match up, and you're all of a sudden, you feel like you're the crazy person. You feel like you're the one that's the problem, because that's how he made me feel. I mean, I was diagnosed with PTSD as I was going through this. It was every single conversation was high conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, for many of us, especially women, because we're really out of all of this, we're the 90, probably I say 90% the times the victim of gaslighting and things of that nature. And again, I want the audience to understand, unless you have been through anything like this, you are not going to understand why she stayed.
Right.
A lot of times people ask, I remember having a family member that was being abused, and I could not understand. I kept saying, why are you going back? Why are you going back? I offered my house. I'm like, just come stay with me. And I couldn't understand till I myself went through it, because there's a level of, all you know is this.
Correct.
This is love. And, you're hoping it's going to get better. And what I love is that because what I heard was that you had to get to the place where you had to decide you needed to do it for you.
Correct.
No longer am I doing this for the children. And I can remember when I myself had gotten to a place in my life where I said, I cannot do this for the children anymore. I have to do this for me. And it's a strength that you don't think you have that kind of comes up in you for you to make that decision to finally get out of there.
I mean, we believe, our kids are going to be okay, and therefore we'll be okay, but it's backwards. We have to be okay first, and then our kids are okay. And this whole experience taught me that I had to put me first. And as uncomfortable as that was, and as hard as that was, that's the person who got us out of that situation.
Yeah, because your kids are looking for you to do better. And, in one of the simplest terms or phrases I can say, because I can remember my daughter looking at me when I left out of our situation, and we were in our home, and she looked at me and she said, Mommy, she said, it's just going to be me, you, and she named her brother. And I never thought that my kids even really knew what was going on within the home. And so our kids perceive so much more than what we think they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they take their cues from us. And so if we, say this is safe and okay, they're like, okay. Right. And the moment I started not being okay, they were not okay, but I wasn't looking at it like that. I was looking at, I was doing something wrong, rather than seeing that they were just a mirror and reflection of what was going on.
How are they doing now?
They're doing great. So as hard as COVID was for so many people, 2 weeks before the pandemic hit was my divorce. And so from a timing perspective, divine timing indeed, because they were never quarantined with him. And it meant that we went from this volatile relationship. So they were now home with me full time. So my job came remote, they came remote, everybody was home. And so it gave us an opportunity to heal. We weren't going anywhere. Nobody was doing anything. And, it took some time, and they definitely had a lot to process, because they did lose a father, and they did lose an entire half of their family, because his family also is gone from our lives. And they had, that's a loss. Yes. But they were able to really heal and reconnect, and I'm their safe person again. And, I've continued to shift and change my life. And we left Colorado last year because I needed to start over. I needed to, I didn't want to ever run into him or his family. And they've been through a lot of change, but they're much more grounded than they had been. And they come to me when they need things, and sure, they fight, and sure, we have their kids, but they're so much better than they ever were. And I know that they're just going to be more better the more I heal, and the more I say, how I'm doing. And, they know I'm writing a book. They obviously aren't going to read it because they're not really old enough yet, but, they're not upset by it. They're proud of what I'm doing.
And see, what I love about our boys is that they're so protective of their mom.
They really are. They really are. Absolutely. And I actually recently remarried. I have a new husband who I met through a lot of the spiritual work that I started doing after all of this, because I had to go deep dive and understand more if this was real. And he's a yoga instructor and, a poet and the most heart-centered man. And so now I have somebody who's emotionally available, who can help teach boys, that it's okay to have the feelings and to talk through things. And we have, they're able to heal some of that father wound stuff in a different way too.
And that's a blessing, because, a lot of times it takes a while for people to be able to heal to the place where they can enter into a healthy relationship. Yeah. And so that's a blessing in itself. So tell us a little more about your spiritual work and your
So I jumped headfirst into learning everything I could find, because if this is real, and she can do it, I can do it too, was really my reaction to all of that. And with COVID, I ended up leaving my corporate job also, because I couldn't do full-time stay at home with the kids and all of that. And so I jumped into learning all of the different healing modalities. And, for me, therapy was great when I needed it, but I actually graduated multiple times from therapists. They were like, you're fine. I did not have things still. And so I was looking for something that was beyond that. And I learned quantum healing, which is basically when we start looking at past and future versions of self, and we step outside of this linear time and space. And so I jumped into learning all of that, and my senses and my gifts and things started to turn on. And I started to understand more about, once I got safe and my body felt safe, I could experience more. I could perceive more. And, I could pass that information along in a different way. And so it's evolved, and I do healing and coaching, and I teach classes as well. And it really focuses on helping people establish who they are in a different way. And I want to help people turn on their own things. It's not my way. There's so many different things out there, and everybody has access to magic. And so, I actually channeled a whole modality that really focuses on the gravity of our consciousness and the weight and importance that we place on things. And I'm kind of this like quantum physics / spirituality. And as we're learning with, the new Nobel Prize winner, that it's, all of the things that we didn't have proof of, they're starting to even be able to prove. And it's really exciting to be able to go there and to have those conversations, because I come from an IT background. So everything is a computer and everything is a processor, but I look at a body and a human and this human experience not dissimilarly. We have the programming and we have the hardware and the software, and we have all of these network connections to other people. And so we can use those kind of things to help people understand that we can reprogram our subconscious. And when we're in these gaslighting situations, it's like we're cut off from the rest of the world, and we have all this programming installed, and we can fix it, and we can undo it, and we can actually, and now we have this huge set of data that can help other people through it in a different way. And so I really enjoy those conversations and helping people see, come out of those things, because when you go through these kind of things, it's so important to help be the light for other people and to show them what's possible. And, if I can succeed at literally creating this impossible outcome, so can you.
Oh, yeah. And I believe that, my mission is, I always say, I'm on a mission to heal one soul at a time, because, when your soul is sick or and wounded, there's no way
Mhm.
your life can really be whole and happy and,
Exactly.
live how you're supposed to live. So I wanted to ask you this question. So would you, with all the work that you've done,
Mhm.
given the way that you, and of course, I don't know your background in your childhood, would you consider the way that you were raised a part of why you enter into what you enter into with your husband?
In a lot of ways, yes. It wasn't necessarily the way I was raised, but it was a lot of the programming that I was raised with. My dad left when I was 9, and so I was raised by a single mom, and she didn't share a lot of her hardship. She tried to protect us from it. And so I also believed that the mom has to keep everything together, and I wasn't going to do what she did. And because she didn't share what happened as much, I knew he hit her one time, but it didn't make sense why we couldn't ever see him. And, so then I heard his version of events, and I ended up blaming my mom for her taking my dad away. And that really, really was ingrained in me, as well as probably my deepest wound being abandonment itself from my father. And so I continued to look for other people to, give me love in that way. And I had a huge spout of teenage promiscuity, and I, ended up in relationships where, sex was the way to get love in a lot of ways. And I didn't see it at 18 and 19, what I was attracting, and then eventually we moved in together and had kids together and seemed like we were normal, but I didn't really understand what I had attracted to begin with, because I was still holding on so much of that wounding from my childhood.
So yeah, so I'm grateful that you're so transparent with your life, because that's how others, like you said, you being the light for other people, because a lot of people hold on to this stuff and never expose what's truly going on, because they feel so it's their fault, or they feel shameful and guilty, or just nasty, or it's just all kinds of feelings and emotions that people sit with, and they just never come out with what they need to come out with, because without us talking about these things, we can't get healed.
No, we can't. And, it was fascinating to me as I'm getting prepared to launch this book out into the world. And, we looked up, has anybody ever told the wife's story? Is there a comparison? There's not a single one. Nobody has ever told the wife's story. There's so much shame and stigma around this kind of thing. And whether you feel like you're a party to it or you don't want to talk about it, like nobody's ever done it. So it was so important for me to come out loud and transparent as possible and share the story.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I just applaud you for it, because I've interviewed and I've counseled so many different women, and they will skip the whole, that whole inside, and they might get to the court system, but they won't go to, and I'm like, but we need to talk about what was going
Right.
on in order for you to heal. So thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure our audience is most grateful. I want you to tell us where we can find you. Of course, we're going to have links in the
Yeah.
description, but for those who are listening via online podcast or radio, if you can let us know where we can find you, and how we can get your book.
Yeah. So the sextraffickerswife.com is my website for the book. It currently has a sign up for email until it's released. It's being released January 10th, 2023. So depending on when this airs. And my healing coaching business is amandaquickhealing.com. So you can find me there. I'm also on all platforms is Amanda Quick Healing, or the Sex Trafficker's Wife. I'm on Facebook and TikTok, I believe. TikTok is kind of blowing up with the story, so I'm having fun with it.
Wow. I'm excited. I really am excited. So those of you who are on here, who are listening, look, you are not alone. You do not have to continue to sit in silence. You do not have to sit in the darkness of what you've been through. You are not the first. You would not be the last. But look, if you are looking for someone you can get with, who can help you through your process, get with Amanda, please. By all means, get with her, because it's better to go through with somebody who has already experienced and who have overcome. And if she can do it, you can too. You can
100%.
not have to sit there and think that life is over. Look at Amanda's got a whole new husband.
I do.
A good one.
I do. I have a whole new husband. I have a whole new life. I have a whole new business. Like everything in my life has changed. And at this point in the experience, I can be grateful. I can be grateful for what I walked through because I wouldn't be the same person that I am today without it.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love, as a counselor, what I love is what you said was when you said I graduated. Let me tell y'all something. If you do the work, if you're willing to do the work, you will be able to say you graduated too. Because Amanda, it took bravery. You had to be brave, and it took courage from a place I'm sure you just didn't know you even had to get
Correct.
to this place.
Yeah.
You know, because you walked through hell, you lived in hell.
Mhm.
And look at you now. You can't even tell you have been through anything. You know,
Nope.
it just looks like, okay. I mean, but that's what I call grace in action. So I thank you for coming on here. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm excited. I can't wait till your book comes out. And when will it be released?
January 10th.
January 10th. Okay. So y'all mark your calendars, get on the email list, and let's make it be a bestseller. Is it going to be?
That's my goal. I want New York Times bestseller. We're not, I mean, Amazon is fine, but I want to go big with this. January also happens to be Sex Trafficking Awareness Month. And so I really think it's important that, you know, we bring awareness to this because it's, you know, I'm from on the wife side of it, but there were a whole lot of victims out there who, you know, need awareness brought to this whole situation.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm excited. So we're gonna do our best to make it get to New York Times bestsellers list. And look, we're gonna be looking for a movie.
Yes.
Because I tell you, this if this doesn't make it to the movie,
I know, right? I see it. I'm here for it. My only stipulation is that somebody needs to be willing to make it as truthful to the experience. I don't want it Hollywoodized. It's crazy enough. You know, if somebody wants to do it, I am here for it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we are gonna speak it into existence. I'm believing that it will happen. And again,
Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, audience, for joining us for another episode. Please take the time to share. If you haven't already, subscribe, and look. Go get somebody, go get one of your girlfriends, go get somebody, because today's episode is one that will bring so much healing to the souls of those who have been through incidences like this. And so again, we love you. And as always, I am praying for you guys.
Thank you.